Hey everyone, this is Richard here with The Gaming Gym. Today we're at the table with the DC Comics deck building game by Cryptozoic. The game plays 2 to 5 players, ages 15 and up. My daughter actually has the highest score ever in the game, where the object of the game is to get the most points. And she was, I believe, 10 at the time, so I think the age range could probably be a little younger as long as you feel like it's a good fit thematically with, superheroes and defeating villains and whatnot. We have found, with it being the most played game in our library, just based on the theme, is the comics are easily relatable, the characters are easy to pick up on, they're iconic, so that's appealing in and of itself. It sets up very quickly. So with it, how many times it has hit the table, the game probably plays in about an hour, and most of that is because we've kind of memorized where we want to go with our turns, and we know what the cards do and whatnot. But it's a super solid game. It plays really quick. I'm going to show you what it looks like for setup and to get a game going, and I'll show you what a couple of sample gameplay turns might look like and the way the engine in this deck building game works and how you generate more cards. So as I said, you want to get as many points as possible. Now, the anatomy of a card is, of course, you've got the title of it. You have 5 different card types in the game. You've got the pink cards, which are locations. The reds are villains. Orange are superpowers. Blue are heroes. And gray are equipments. And the lower right of a card is always going to be the cost. That's how much currency or money, if you will. In this game, it's called power. Everything that you can think of it thematically of how does it make sense to you, in that you play the role of a superhero for the game. And these are the big boys, the iconic ones, the Superman and Batman and Flash in the DC universe. And you're acquiring this superpower, which is called super strength. And the way to acquire that is you pay that cost in power. You may look at it as you're using your power to hire or get Catwoman to join you. You may actually gain various equipments, and that's a buy or acquire that. You also use power to defeat villains, and both villains on the in the lineup here, which is what this row is called, in addition to super villains, which you acquire in the same way. They're just significantly more expensive. So you can see here we're looking at 10s, 11s, and 12s. So you need to generate a lot of power, which you're not going to be able to do early in the game. And also, the lower left of a card is how many points that card is worth. Those are victory points at the end of the game. When the final villain is defeated, and it recommends playing with 8 total villains, you always have to play with Ra's al Ghul. He always goes on top of the deck. The remaining villains that you choose or randomly choose are shuffled, so you don't know who's coming up next. You can play a shorter game with 8 villains or a longer game with 12 villains. Whenever the final villain is defeated, all players gather up all the cards in their deck, and you just simply add up the total victory points. So what you're trying to do is acquire cards. Generally, the more expensive the card is to acquire and the harder it is to gain and put into your deck, the more points it's going to be worth, such as the supervillains. But sometimes you want to maybe go for cards that aren't as many points because it fits with the theme of your deck and your superhero and the synergy of it, and maybe certain cards combo off one another. So that being said, let's take a look at the superheroes very quickly. Each player is going to get one of these. When we play with my daughter, I let her pick, but you can simply just randomize them and then deal one out to each player in the game. And the reason for that is there isn't a major advantage or disadvantage where one player that's playing as a certain superhero for this game is going to automatically be in the lead or have such a big advantage over another. They just provide static abilities that may or may not trigger on your turns, and they give you a sort of a direction that you may want to go and what types of cards you want to purchase. Superman, for example, plays really well with superpowers, so you always want to look for the orange cards in the lineup. Batman, as would thematically make sense, is really big on equipments, so you want to maybe play more of the gray cards. You don't have to purchase those cards, just as you don't have to, if you generate enough power, you don't have to beat these supervillains. You can choose, any cards you want, and you play accordingly. So each player is going to just get one of these. We've got Batman, Aquaman, Wonder Woman, Green Lantern, Cyborg, Flash, and that's it. So we'll just randomize. We'll pretend that I'm giving Superman to this player. We'll give Batman to this player and Aquaman to the player to my right. And unless a player is Flash and it indicates otherwise, or it tells you on the Flash, you go first. If no one is playing as Flash, you just randomly determine who's going to be the first player. Each player is then going to get a starter deck. Now, it doesn't matter who their superhero is. The starter decks are all the same. The starter decks are going to be made up of 3 vulnerabilities, which are basically dead cards, and 7 punches. And the punches provide +1 power. So these are the cards that just sort of get your engine rolling and give you that initial buying power in order to acquire cards that are in the lineup. Okay, and then at the end of the game, even if these are in your deck, they're worth 0 points. So starter cards are they're not going to contribute anything towards you winning the game. Like I said, they're just the base cards that you start with, and you're obviously going to be upgrading your deck, typical deck builder style, in order to be more efficient with your turns. There are quite a few destroy kind of trash mechanics in this game, and what those are methods for you to be able to thin out your deck and permanently remove from the game certain cards. And you want to do that so that way you're drawing the more efficient cards each turn. You know, if my deck was made up of only, multiple copies of these cards here, you're only going to draw those instead of drawing these weaker cards, because every card that's in here and in this large deck is always going to be better than your starter cards. Okay, so each player gets that stack of 10 cards, 7 punches, and 3 vulnerabilities. You now also have a stack of kicks, which you just set off to the side, accessible to all players. The kicks just provide kind of a cheaper cost card that you can acquire if the lineup is too expensive. Here we have a 2 and a 3, but sometimes you may only have, a 4, 7, 4, 5, and 5. An early game, it can be hard to generate a lot of power, so this kind of just gives you some default card to get, and it's a +2 power card, so it's a little more powerful than your basic kick or your basic punch. Okay, that's kick. You also have a stack of weaknesses. You don't, on your own, acquire these. Other cards in the deck will give these to your opponents, and at the end of the game, they're worth -1 points. Okay? And they will go into their deck as well, meaning that there's a chance, eventually they're going to draw these into their hand, and that therefore it's also going to be a dead card in their hand. So these are negative cards that you can use sort of attacks in the game to attack other players. This is one of the interactions with other players in the game. You finally then, as indicated earlier, you decide on whether you want to play with a total of 8 villains or all 12. We like to play with all 12 because, again, we play the game relatively quickly. You shuffle those and you put Ra's al Ghul on top. Now, an interesting thing with villains, super villains I should say, versus these, is whenever a supervillain is defeated, and again, that's a player's choice, assuming they have enough power to defeat that villain, you're going to want them because they're going to eventually come into your hand, and they have really powerful abilities, so they're going to be better versions of almost everything in here. They're also going to be worth the most points. Whenever you acquire that supervillain, you gain it, and then in order to sort of do the cleanup phase before the next player clockwise goes, you have to reveal a new supervillain. Whenever a supervillain is revealed, he has an attack ability, which is called the first appearance, and it's just a negative thing that can maybe make players discard their entire hand or lose certain cards from their hand or gain a bunch of weaknesses, things like that. And each player has to deal with that attack separately. Players may have defensive cards, which can be gained from the deck. Defensive cards in their hands, and defenses allow you to ignore those attacks. So, that's a big thing to think about, because the supervillains can have some sometimes devastating attacks, which really can throw kind of a curveball in what your plan was on your turn, because it's before you get to go. So as soon as a player defeats a supervillain, they put it into their discard pile just as if they acquired any other card, and I'll show you that when we get to the gameplay part. And then before the next player, in this case, if I'm Superman, before Batman gets his turn, a new supervillain would be revealed. All players at the table need to resolve that attack ability, and it may cause a problem with what Batman is trying to do. Again, because it may cause him to discard some cards from his hand, or things like that. So the attacks of these supervillains, they all happen. They all have a different one. A lot of them will make thematic sense of how they work, where Joker's is kind of a little bit chaotic, things like that. and they can either be dealt with by drafting or acquiring defenses. And if you happen to not have the defense in your hand, then you're going to have to deal with the penalty of that. So that's how supervillains work. Again, we usually decide to play with 12, so you'll set Ra's al Ghul on top, the rest are shuffled. You then shuffle this massive deck. This is where a lot of the gameplay and replayability comes in, and just the cool factor of the game, because this is where the bulk of your cards are. And this deck isn't exact, it's well over 100 cards, and it isn't made up of, only 10 to 12 different cards with 10 copies of each. There's maybe 2 copies, or, at most, of most of these cards. So there's just a lot of variety in here. You shuffle this up, and you always reveal 5 in the lineup. You've got your stack of weaknesses and kicks. All superheroes have been dealt out. You can return the remaining ones to the box that aren't played. And players begin by shuffling their 10-card starting deck. And then, as we determined earlier, whoever randomly goes first, or if a player is flashed, that player goes first, and then play would continue clockwise. Okay? So let's jump on next into the sort of some gameplay turns and how do you acquire these cards. Okay, once I've shuffled, I draw the top 5. I set the remaining as my deck off to the side. I'm just going to put Superman off to the side here. I then play my entire hand. Now, that's kind of the key in most deck builders, and I think all actually, is you always play every card in your hand. You resolve every one of your cards. You don't generally get to keep any cards and hold them back for the next turn. You take your entire hand, you generate whatever the currency is. As I said, in this game it's called power. You acquire any cards you want. So in this case, I've got 2 vulnerabilities, which are 0. They're nothing for me. I've got punch, which is +1 power, so 1, 2, 3. So I've got 3 power this turn. With that 3, I can completely ignore Ra's and these 3 here. I may want to get Catwoman, perhaps Nth Metal, or maybe the kick. Now I'm playing as Superman, and this is where you can see it drive sort of the direction you want to go. Superman gets +1 power for each different superpower that I play on my turns. So of the ones I can acquire, an equipment, a hero, and a superpower, this is the only one, so I'll take that kick. And what you do is you take the newly acquired card, which is my kick, along with my entire hand. I discard all of it, and it goes into my discard pile. I redraw back up to 5. If anything was acquired from the lineup, I would replenish that, but nothing was. Again, if the supervillain was defeated, I would have to reveal a new one, and we'd have to deal with that first appearance attack. But in this case, everything is good. I redrew back up to 5. Batman would now take his turn. Aquaman would take their turn. Back to me. I now have 1, 2, 3. I have now 4 punches, so 4 power. The vulnerability is nothing. And in this case, even though I can take another one, you can always buy less. Or assuming, let's say I had 13 power, you can buy any number, any combination. I can purchase this for 7, Clayface for 4, and Catwoman for 2. Or for whatever reason I don't want Catwoman in my deck, I can just purchase 7 and 4 and throw the other 2 away. And the interesting thing with the lineup is, some deck builders will replace immediately. This game, when you acquire a card, I can't, if I had 13 power, for example, I can't acquire Super Strength for 7 and then wait to see what comes up next. Okay, you acquire everything you acquire on your turn, and then at the end of your turn, when you refill your hand, that's when the lineup gets refilled. Okay? So, this case, though, I only have 4. I can get another superpower again, or another kick for 3 and just nothing to acquire with the remaining 1. But Superman says you only get +1 for each different type. So, playing both of them in the same turn isn't going to give me the +1 benefit. So what I'm going to do with this 4 is I'll go ahead and get a Clayface. So I acquire Clayface. I put it in my discard pile along with my entire hand. There is some significance, especially later in the game when you've got cards that combo off each other, in what order you play cards, but just remember that generally you're always going to be playing your entire hand, okay? And you're going to resolve everything. So I discard my entire hand. I'm going to have to refill the lineup before Batman goes. Now I need to draw, and this is where you can see the engine and how the game, the deck building mechanic of it all works. I need to draw back up to 5 cards, but I have no deck. So what you then do is you have to then take your discard pile and you shuffle the whole thing. And here's where you can see that now I'm shuffling in Kick and Clayface, which are the two better cards that I've acquired over my turns. I shuffle those up. I redraw 5. That previous discard pile now forms my new deck, so I don't have a discard pile anymore. And of the 5 cards in my hand, I actually was lucky enough to draw those 2 good cards. So again, Batman's going to take their turn. Aquaman will go. When it's my turn, I now have a much better hand. So I have +1 power with the punch. I have a kick, which is +2 power, so that's 3 total. But Superman gives it an additional +1. So I'm at 3, 4, 5. Vulnerability does nothing. Clayface lets me duplicate a card. So I'll duplicate this kick to give me +2. But being that it's duplicating the exact same card, I don't get this bonus because it says I need different superpowers. But I still have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 for the first one. Duplicate it, 6, 7. I've got 7 power now. And with that 7, again, I can get Suicide Squad and Nth Metal. I'm 1 short of beating the supervillain, but I will take the super strength. So I acquire that. That, along with my whole hand, goes into my discard pile. I redraw back up to 5. And you can see if I was to start thinning cards out, where I can get rid of these punches and vulnerabilities by using cards such as Lobo or even Nth Metal, and get rid of some of those cards, I'm able to get newer, the better cards as I go. So before Batman goes, I would have to replenish the lineup. So that's basically it. You just continue on with that engine, gaining these cards turn after turn until the final supervillain is defeated. You then take all of the cards in your deck and you total up in the lower left corner what the value is of the victory points, and whoever has the most points wins the game. The last thing I want to show is one of the cards in this deck are called locations. They're the pink ones. Locations play a little differently. You acquire them the same as every other card. So I acquire it, it goes into my discard pile. At some point I'll draw it. The only difference is when you play a location, and this is one where the order may matter now, is you want to put it down first. It doesn't generate any power for you, but what it does is it constantly provides this ongoing ability similar to your superhero that may or may not trigger on your turns. And there are multiple, I don't know, maybe 7 or more locations in this deck. You can have multiple of them out. They still count towards 1 point at the end of the game, but they really get an engine roll, the ball rolling on your turn. Because this one here, it's the Fortress of Solitude. It says when you play your first superpower on each of your turns, you get to draw a card. So imagine if I had that turn like I did just previously, but I have this location in play. What would happen now is I would play that as my first card. A punch is +1 power. A punch is +1 power, so that's 2. I play the kick, which is +3, right? Because it's +2, but Superman gives it an additional. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It was my first superpower, so this triggers and lets me draw a new card. Okay, it was nothing in this case, but let's say it was a really good, it was super strength that I drew. So let's back up. I play 1 power, 2, 3, 4. Superman makes it 5. I get to draw a card because it's my first superpower. I get to play that card as well. So now that's +5 power. It's different than kick, so Superman would give me another +1 power. So I'm at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. +5 is 10. +1 more is 11. I'll Clayface this, which doesn't make it different, but it gives me another +5, which puts me, I believe, at 16. So let's just double check. 1, 2, 3, 4. +1 power for each different superpower you play. So there's a kick. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. +5 is 10. An additional 1 is 11. Duplicate it, makes it 16. So just by doing that, having this card, let me draw that, which not only gave me that +6 power because of the Superman, it also gave me another card, a better card that I can duplicate. So with that 16 power, I can acquire Ra's al Ghul for 8, Suicide Squad for 4, Suicide Squad for 4. All of this would get discarded, but your location stays in play. And as the location stays in play, is now that engine may work again next turn. If I played another superpower, it would trigger and I get to draw. And there's, they're basically always going to allow you to draw. There's nothing in the game mechanically or in the deck that is going to get rid of these, either for you or if your opponent has a bunch of these going. You're not going to be able to stop that, you know. But there's the Batcave, which every time you play your first equipment, you get to draw a card, and you know, when you play your first villain, you draw a card. So imagine if I had all of those out, and in one turn I play, you know, Super Strength. Well, I get to redraw another card, and then I have the Batcave out, and I play this, and the Batcave triggers and lets me draw another card. And then the card that I draw is a villain, which might be, you know, another location that says, when you play your first villain, draw a card, you know, and then I play this, and then you can see that the turns can just completely get out of hand. You can really start churning through this deck of super villains, in which case, you know, you're also putting those into your deck. I may be drawing those now, and Lex Luthor says I get to draw 3 cards when I play him. You know, you really get that engine going. You can start building up 20, 30 power in a turn, acquiring a lot of cards, getting through this deck, and then, you know, that's where you can see that you can score upwards of 100+ points. So that's it, folks. That's the DC Comics deck building game. And this is Richard with the Gaming Gym. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you for watching.